All right, so what this recording or what this webinar is going to be covering is proper setting up and doing tensioning on your Avance single head embroidery machine. Um, Tension is one of the biggest problems that people have as embroiderers. If you do not have proper tensions on your machines, then your sew outs will be really low quality. It doesn't matter how good the digitizing is, how nice the fabric is, how good your thread is, whatever. If you do not have the proper tension on your machine, you will have really bad sew outs. Everything from flagging, like looping on top of the design, bobbin showing through the top, or even like birds nesting underneath, all kinds of different issues. Um, so what we're going to be doing, we're going to set up and we're actually going to sew a tension test. I have purposely moved these knobs on the machine to the incorrect positions so that way we can see what the tension is and then how to correct it. All right, so the first thing we're going to be doing, uh, a lot of people you may have seen online and stuff like that say that you can just use backing, like 2 pieces of embroidery backing, to do a proper tension test. This is incorrect, okay? What you'll want to do is use a material sort of like you're sewing on, all right? So if you're, or something similar like in weight, stretchiness, and everything like that. For my test, I'm just using a piece of felt here, all right? But you definitely, anytime you want to do a tension test, always do it with a piece of fabric and a piece of backing, all right? When you do hoop it, the backing needs to be in all sides of the hoops. That's for any kind of hooping whatsoever. If you did backing where it only has partial in there, that basically brings all the stretch of the fabric back. All right, so make sure anytime you hoop that you have backing in all sides. All right, let's go ahead and throw this sucker on here. All right, so the tension test that I created, you're welcome to call in and get it, but it's really simple. All right, what I did was create a column, okay, a column stitch or a satin stitch, which is about 1 inch tall and about a 1/4 inch wide. So that way I can see the consistency of bobbin thread to the top thread on the underneath of the sew out. Okay, so let's explain what tension is, all right? You have a couple different components that are involved in tension. The first one is your bobbin, all right? Your bobbin is the single, the one constant that you have for all 15 of your needles, right? It affects everything because there's only one of them, right? So let's go ahead and set our bobbin tension up, all right? When I have my bobbin case out, it has to spin a certain direction for it to form a proper embroidery stitch. So if I have that opening facing towards me with a pigtail that's on the back here, facing up, and I pull this thread, it should spin clockwise. All right. So now I've got to find out what the tension is on this. What gives this tension is this little leaf spring right over here on the side. Right there. Right? And then the adjustment for that is that bigger screw. Never adjust that little screw. That's just a holder that holds it into place. See if I can zoom in on this correctly so it's not all faded out here. So the bigger screw, this one right here, is the one that we'll use to actually tensioning. A little goes a long way on that thing. So a little 1/4 turn makes a huge difference on these. Okay. So what we use to do a test for our bobbin is called the Eeo test. The reason it's only called a Eeo test, not a yo-yo, because when you drop it, it doesn't come back up. All right. First thing we'll do is to make sure that we have our bobbin in correctly. Let's just pull this out real quick. All right, so what I like to do anytime, and when I train people, I always tell them to put it in their hand, depending on which hand they are, and always face that pigtail towards the top here. All right, so that opening is right up there at the top. So then when I place my bobbin in, I make sure that the thread comes across the top, and when I pull it through my fingers, that it spins clockwise. It has no bearing what the label is on either side here, because sometimes these are just mass produced. They just stamp these little cardboards on the side there, so it doesn't matter which side they are coming off their little conveyor belt. All right, so I make sure the thread goes across the top and to the right. Have that opening facing up, and then when I place my bobbin in there, it kind of self-guides itself into this little groove right there on the side. And then I'll pull it up so it kind of clicks right up underneath that tensioning spring. There's that little click there. And then I go behind the pigtail and just kind of keep it taut and just kind of spin it so that way it guides through that pigtail. Let's see if we can get up here on this. All right, so it's going through the pigtail, not wrapping around it. So that way when I pull, there should be no resistance. It just comes right out. All right, so now let's do an actual tension test on this. All right, it's called the Eeo Test. Now, if I left my thread in that pigtail, if I drop this, that little bobbin will go flying across the room. Do not wind it back up. These are wound at a specific tension, so that's why you never wind it back up if you ever drop one. You'll have really bad sew-outs. You'll probably get a bird nest from that. So what I do is take the thread out of the pigtail. So that way with my thumb and forefinger, I pinch it right above that tensioning spring so it just dangles right here. And then I give it a drop test. It should have about a 2 to 3 inch drop, depending on how hard you drop it. So I do it a couple times to make sure it's consistent, giving that same drop. All right? Then I'll hold it in my fingers right here. Pop that off. And then wrap it around that pigtail. I usually only want about a 2 inch tail coming off the side of the bobbin there. And what I'll do is place that thread right here in front and put my thumb over it. So that way it holds it, doesn't get tucked behind the bobbin, doesn't go up underneath the little leaf spring, and then I can put it back in my machine. When I put it back in my machine, I make sure that pigtail faces up. I do not have to open that little leaf spring there that releases it. I just push it in until it clicks. I can actually feel that little nub sticking up right there, so it won't fall out. I can even wiggle it a little bit and it won't pop out. To get it out, you do have to push that little leaf spring right here and pull it so you can grab it. So I have that little excess there, about 2 inches hanging down. Then I can place my hooped garment up here. Okay, so now we've set up our bobbin tension. That's our one constant, all right? So if I have that tension set from the get-go, then all I have to do is make minor adjustments to my upper tension. All right, so let's go ahead and sew this thing out. I created a program with those 1 inch blocks, or not blocks, but columns, all right? And I made 15 of them, all right? Representing one for each needle. So that way I can adjust the tensions for all of them. Anytime I do a tension test, I will always sew out all 15 needles. I will not try to just do one at a time, because that I don't get to know whether the bobbin's messed up or if it's the upper tension. So I have to sew out all 15 of them to do it properly. All right, so let's go ahead and hit start here. Whoops, that one came out real quick. 1 second. When you move the machines, like I moved this machine from our showroom into our webinar room here. So sometimes when you move these things around, the threads will come unloose, and sometimes that first stitch will come undone. Let me show you a little trick here. When rethreading, a lot of people think that you have to go through the presser foot, but if you're sewing with that same needle, you can insert the thread, just the tip of the thread, into the needle about 1 inch. And then when you make that stitch, it'll actually take the thread down into it with it, so you don't have to sit there and thread it really hard. So then I'll just hit start. No tail sticking up or anything like that. Oops. Let me hit stop real quick. Looks like I didn't program my thread changes. Let me go in here and hit thread trim. Let's see here. Let's escape out of this. I got to go in and set my color order. Okay, so I'll do, it looks like I did them in the wrong order here. Well, here, let's just start this sucker over. I'm going to go back. We'll start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, okay. So we'll hit set. Head back to home, back to start. Okay. So let's start over here. Since I didn't set up my thread changes here, I'm just going to hoop another piece. So let me show you the hooping process, just so you have that as well. Grab a piece of material. I'll bring this around here real quick. All right. So when hooping, you have your outer ring, your actual inner ring, which is the top part of the hoop that connects to the machine. Make this just a hair bit tighter. I will make sure to place my backing so that way it covers up the entire ring. Place my fabric on top of here. Counterbalance it in, kind of hold it taut, kind of pull it down from the bottom here, and then press down. I can give it a little bit of a tug on the either side. I try to do it evenly to spread the fabric. I will also take my finger and slide it across this material. If I can push the fabric with my finger and it puckers, that means your machine's going to pucker the design, pucker the fabric around your design so it looks like it's all bubbly. So I flip it over, make sure that the backing is on all sides of the hoops. I push up on the hoop just a hair to give it a little bit of a lip so that way it doesn't have a chance of popping off. All right. Then I'll come back over to my machine, place it on here. It'll always face towards the inside of the machine here. Get in, and I'll go ahead and hit start. Now that I've programmed my color changes, it'll do it properly. Do that first stitch again. Oh, what even threaded. I have to get onto my other text for not leaving the machine proper. But it's hard to find good help, right? Okay, so like I said before, I do like to go around this back hoop. It helps guide that thread into the thread guide. Oops. Just kind of push it behind it, and when you pull it taut, it goes into that little hook. Wish the opening was a little bit better, but that's the way they're designed. Tip here, insert it just about an inch. Till I'm getting old now, I can barely see. Hit start. If I hold the start button in, it will go so slowly to get that first stitch started, and then when I let go, it goes to full speed. A lot of people don't know about that. Some other stuff to consider while this is just sewing out, just so we don't have a bunch of dead air time. Whenever I check my bobbin case, if I notice that I have a thread break or something like that, and I notice that the thread is still attached to the fabric, so then the first thing I do is take a look at my bobbin. I'll pull it out, and then if it's even below halfway through, I'll go ahead and just replace that bobbin. Bobbins are considered pennies, so you would always want a fresh bobbin in there. And sometimes when they wrap those bobbins at the manufacturer, that bottom half of it just has a little bit too much tension on it, so sometimes that can cause sew-out issues with improper tension, things like that. So sometimes once you get down to halfway or below, and you start having thread breaks, just throw that bobbin out and put a new one in. And then if you're still having it, then go up the troubleshooting chain, figuring out why these thread breaks are happening. So what it's doing is just sewing out a column here. I mean, you can create H-Test. I mean, we have tension tests on our website that you can download and sew out. Or you can just create your own by using like a 1-inch block eye that has a 1/4 inch wide column. Here, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Oops. This one wasn't threaded here. You notice that when I also get a thread break that I pull out about 1 foot of thread, because I just want to make sure that I'm checking my thread pathing to see if there's any kind of resistance that feels weird, so that way I can correct that if necessary. Yeah, thread pathing is a major problem with thread tension, because if your thread is not pathed through the machine properly, then no matter what you do with the knobs or anything like that, it will never give you a proper tension. All right, insert that just a little bit. Hit start. And one thing I did do is make sure that I had some metallic thread on my thread rack today, so that way you can see me adjust the tension for metallic thread as well. You may notice that the machine slows down at different points. It's basically a safety feature of the machine. It knows that with that wide of a stitch, it needs to sew at this RPM for it to sew properly and give that proper stitch. That's why when it does like a shorter stitch, it seems to be running faster and then slows down automatically. This is the metallic thread sewing right now. All right, almost done. Still up the wrong one? Must have programmed in the wrong needle there. I think I skipped over 14. So let's do a thread shim. Let's go into my needle selection. Set needle color. We want number 15 to be 14. Yeah, I skipped over one, guys. Sorry. Hit enter. And we'll hit start. Okay, let's see. So I'll just sew over top of it. Won't really matter. All right. Just about. Okay, now that my tension test is finished, so let me back up a little bit here. Now we get to examine it. Cut off this little extra thread here. There we go. All right, so now what I'm going to look for is I got to remember which one is number 1. Bring this around here. So it's basically sews around 1, 2, 3, and so forth, all the way around. But then I did switch 15 and 14, so I'll just remember those two. All right. So what we're going to look for is the top there. All right. So I look here. These were the little extra threads that were sticking out, were the ones that were kind of wrapped up in the spring on the front of the machine here. So if that tail was too long, you'll have a little tail sticking out. So those aren't really a big deal. I'm looking at the columns themselves to see if there's any looping within the columns. All right, so let's flip this over here. So what we're looking for is a consistency of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 top thread, 1/3 bobbin, 1/3 top thread. Now I don't need to get a ruler on here and sit there and measure those things, but it just needs to be a good amount of bobbin showing and equal parts of color showing on the top. So let's examine these things, and we'll go around through these and see if we need to make adjustments on any of these. So what we did is, if you notice that all of them are having something consistent, say a lot of bobbin showing on all of them, that means my bobbin tension is probably just a little bit too tight. All right. If they're all consistently showing no bobbin, that means that my bobbin's probably too tight and it's pulling thread from the top down. If the bobbin's too loose, it'll show a lot of bobbin because it's able to, the top thread's pulling it towards the top of the design. So they're all within kind of a tolerable range. They're all about the same here. All right, so let's go through and let's look at this. So number 1, right there, I don't think I'm really going to mess with that too much. Let me see if I can get that to focus a little bit better. There we go. That looks close enough to, good enough for government work, as I like to say. Same thing with the blue, or I'm sorry, the black here, rotating around. This is starting to show a little bit too much bobbin, so I could probably loosen my top thread just a little bit to do a minor adjustment. Now, to do minor adjustments, that's going to be your thread rack up here. You're going to make minor adjustments with these knobs. Your major adjustments are the ones that are up here on the top. These are pretty much set from the factory for polyester thread. It's about 2 threads on the of the knob showing here. This is kind of my starting point. Let me take this camera off here so I can actually show you what I'm talking about. Excuse me for making you dizzy real quick. Hold on one second. So as you notice, each one of these knobs are about the same all the way across. There's about 2 threads showing inside there. I can zoom or focus in on that. All right. So that's my constant. I try to keep those really close to each other because they're all the same types of threads. All right. So then let's go back over here to my tension test. Let's do the navy blue here. Before I make any adjustments, I make sure that I check my thread pathing and everything like that. It did sew out properly, so I know my thread pathing is good. So what I'll do is just kind of give a half a turn. That's where I'll start with that, just to let that top thread or the bobbin pull that top thread down just a little bit more, so that way I have less bobbin showing and more top thread showing. Let's see, the orange here looks pretty good. Same thing with the pink. It's about perfect. If it's a little bit jagged, that could be all right. You might have, that's another reason you would not want to go up here and re-wrap your thread around the spool. If you drop it across the floor or something, just throw that thread away. My orange here looks like it's a little bit skinny. So what I'll do is come over here to my orange, and I'm going to tighten that up probably about a half a turn. All right, keep rotating around. Burgundy. That looks about good. Khaki looks really good. I'm not even going to mess with it. The red and the turquoise here look like they're showing a lot. All right, so that's going to be the red here. So I'm going to loosen that up just about a half to 3/4 of a turn. And then I'm going to do a full turn on the blue because it's showing a lot. Same thing, I'm going to do about 3/4 of a turn to a full turn on the brown. Then I look at my metallic. See if I can focus in on that. It looks pretty good. Whoever was using the machine before probably set it up pretty well. Now you may ask yourself, or here, I'll ask this question. All right. What do you think you should do with metallic thread? Do you think that you should have a tighter tension on metallic thread or a looser tension on metallic thread? Let me show you some of the characteristics of metallic thread. All right, so metallic thread, if you run it through your fingers here, it feels coarse, like it has texture to it. It's basically a metallic piece of foil wrapped around a polyester core. So it feels like it's got texture to it. And if you pull it through your finger, it can sometimes pucker, right? So also I noticed that it has stretch to it, right? That stretch will affect your tension. So by increasing or tightening your tension, it will actually help you get that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So if I'm ever going to go and put metallic thread on my machine and I notice that it's kind of balling up like it's rat nesting right here at the bottom, that means my tension is way too loose. It's trying to suck too much of that top thread down here on the bottom. So it looks like it's kind of thin, so I'm even going to tighten it up just a little bit more. Let's do about a half turn. So I'm back up here. The next one would have been the gold. I'm going to tighten it just a little bit in the middle, right there. All right, and then we switched around the red. Looks about perfect. That's 14. And then the white, you can't really see it because of the video here, but yeah, it's pretty much perfect. So then what I would do to see if I did it right, sew the sucker out again. All right, let's get another piece of material here. I'll hoop it up again. Same as before, making sure backing is in all sides of that ring. All right, the reason I'm using the material, the backing and the actual cloth, is I want to make sure, hold on one second, I think I lost my video here. There we go. Is I want it to be as close to what I'm sewing on, like say a polo shirt or a jacket back, whatever it may be. I want it to be as close to that so that way I can see what the tension's like going to be when I sew that out. All right, so I'm going to hit start again. Just sew the whole design out. Wait a minute, I'm going to hit start and get the proper sequence here. All right, so we'll go to my needles. Set color in there. Make sure this one goes to 15. Yep, I gotta escape out of this because I've got it set. Hold on one second. Back to home. All right. Disengage embroidery. All right, so now we'll just hit start. There we go. So then what I'll do after I sew this out, I'll compare the two, the first and the second tension test to see if I need to make any more adjustments. Also, keep in mind when you're doing your sew outs on your garments, okay, you have to clear out or clean your backing off of the back of the garment. So when you look at the back of your design, take a look at your stuff that has column stitches that make the columns go back and forth. They should have that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 type aspect. If you notice that you're not having any bobbin showing on the underneath of your design, start looking at your bobbin. Your bobbin tension is probably a little bit too tight. Now, if it's miss and match, just like one or two of the threads doesn't have that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 look to it, then it's probably your upper tensions that might have to be adjusted. So you can technically adjust these things on a fly as they're sewing out. So when you pull the design off or shirt off and you look at the back of the design, take a look at those things to see if you see anything weird. I'm going to pull up my little question field here. Does anybody have any questions at this time? All right, so I did get a question from Sandy here that says, when would you need to adjust the top set of tension? And I believe that she's speaking of the tensions that are up here on these top racks. The only time that I would probably adjust those if I was doing a major thread change, like using say a cotton thread with a larger needle, something that has a much larger diameter thread to it, or even a thinner thread, such as like silk. And then I would probably make major adjustments, all right? So I would do full turns of these to tighten them up, and then start working with these back and forth to make sure that they're doing right. Your bobbin tension will always be the same, okay? Okay, here's a good valid question that just came in from Danielle. What is the trend of tension when in stitching on light fabrics versus thicker fabrics? Your thicker fabrics will definitely have a little bit looser of a tension than your thinner fabrics, meaning you've got to think about the sandwich of your fabrics, okay? So you have the backing down here, your fabric, and then the stitching on top, all right? So the thicker goods, you have more of the thread wrapping around, making those embroidery loops, because that's what an embroidery stitch is. It's a interlocking loop with the backing that kind of wraps around, making a loop, right? So you've got a sandwich, right? So if you have more meat in there, it's going to be looser. If you have less meat in there, it's going to be tighter. Does that make sense? I hope so. All right, so let's take this off, take a look at it. So yeah, all these tensions are about perfect. Now that blue is still showing a little bit extra there, and it didn't adjust that much. So what I'll do is go up here to this top tension, and here's up here the thread rack. And I'm going to trace that back up to my teal. I'm going to loosen that up about a half a turn. Same thing with the khaki that's next to it. All right. So that way it's basically allowing more of that top thread to come through. Because if I did a minor adjustment right here and it didn't really phase it too much and moved it just a little bit, but then didn't pull it into where I wanted it, so that's when I would go up to the top there. All right, but these are all within tolerance range here, so I'm just going to leave it as is. My top stitches look good, and that's what the main point is. This has to look good. All right, so any questions on kind of going through tension, right? It is important to know that we set these tensions with the thread that we send to you before we send it out. We actually show like a 300,000 stitch logo before we even send these machines out the door to make sure that we don't have any like hiccups or any kind of hidden flaws or something like that once the customer gets the machine. So kind of you've already got a starting point unless you switch thread manufacturers, something like that. then you won't really have to worry about tensioning too much. You'll just be making minor adjustments if you're switching threads. Some of the stuff that other things that affect thread tension is even thread color. White thread versus black thread, right? The tension runs a lot tighter on, or I'm sorry, looser on black thread versus white because of the dyes that they use to change the thread color, right? I don't know why. It's just one of those things. It runs rougher through these little tensioning springs. Okay, here's a good question. By Sandy. She says that she stitches a lot of freestanding lace. Is there a suggestion for thread tension since using water-soluble stabilizer? Well, whenever I do it, I usually use probably about 2 to 3 pieces of that stabilizer material, the water-soluble stuff. I want it to have structure, like a foundation for those stitches to kind of hold on to themselves. You'll still be running a tension because you're trying to make that stabilizer, the water-soluble stabilizer, as thick as you would a piece of fabric and a piece of backing, so that way you have that tension. All right, run a tension test just on that to see what it looks like. Adjust your stabilizer and then make adjustments to that, and then go on to sew your final design. I think that'll help you out tremendously. Also doing the freestanding lace and stuff, using a smaller needle, going down from a 7511 to like a 7010 or even a 65-9 will give you tighter stitching. You can go with a lower weight thread. It's not really necessary. But yeah, the smaller needles and stuff like that give you tighter registration, smaller holes that it's penetrating. All right. Oh, okay. So the tension differences between black and white is not something that you just have to know, I need an extra turn of this or an extra turn of that. It's just they run differently through the machine because of dye colors, like what they use for the dye lots. As it runs through the machine, it runs through these little tensioning discs at a different tension. So to correct the tension of what it needs to be, sew it out. Look what it is and adjust it accordingly. Also, some stuff that affects thread tension is your thread rack right here. If you do not have your thread rack extended all the way to the top, it will give you tension problems. It'll give you sew out problems, thread breaks, just poor quality sew outs. I don't know what that little 6 inches of metal does to raise this up, but it really makes a difference. Also, some other little tricks you can do for doing like metallic thread. Like I said, you have to tighten your tensions on your metallic threads to the point where I have to sew out a column to see what it looks like. All right, I'll probably, now that I'm just looking at this, I'm going to tighten that one up just a little bit as well. So that way it pulls a little bit more there. All right. So I hope this has been informative. If you do have any more specific questions or anything like that, please don't hesitate to create a support ticket. You can do that from our support site, support.coldesi.com, or you're welcome to call into the front desk here, and our lovely receptionist, Darla, will field your question and put it to the appropriate person to get your stuff answered.